Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Mona Seghatoleslami, back for another Arts Friday with a subject near and dear to the hearts of many Rochesterians and music fans around the world. Flugelhorn player, composer, conductor, jazz legend, beloved Rochesterian Chuck Mangione. The Jazz Brothers and Art Blakey, Feel So Good, Children of Sanchez, Bella Via, the 1980 Olympics, his support for music education and our community, Italian earthquake relief, family stories, inspiration through community. Where even to start? Well, we are in good company with Bob Snyder, Associate Professor of Jazz Studies at the Eastman School of Music and an alum of the Chuck Mangione Band. Hey there, Bob.
Hey, Mona. It's great to be here.
And also we have Ardis Mangione-Lindley, a family member, a daughter of Gat Mangione, a musician I've loved seeing with his band around town and at the Sodas Point Lighthouse, and also the niece of Chuck Mangione, and she has some really great stories to share. So, Ardis, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And then we're also opening up the phones, the email, the YouTube comments, because I would love to hear from you. I feel like my social media feeds have been full of stories from musicians who got their start in the business in Rochester because of Chuck Mangione. My family members around the country are like, oh man, I love that music, and we hadn't even really talked about it before. So if you'd like to call in, the number is 1-844-295-TALK. That's 1-844-295-8255. You can email connections@wxxi.org, and you can also be watching us on the radio on the WXXI News YouTube channel, and you can comment there. So, Bob, I think I'm going to start with you. You refer to yourself as an alum of the Chuck Mangione Band. What was it like to study in the musical school of Chuck?
Well, it all started with an audition, and that goes back, I believe, 1993. And I did a little bit of homework ahead of time. First, I should say that Ardis's dad, Gap, had recommended me for an audition. And I think his words were, before you make a decision on your new band, you should check out this kid from Rochester. And I had no idea he had said that. And he had come out to hear me at this place that was around the corner from Eastman called the Rochester Club Restaurant. And then I met him, and he was so nice to me. And then I had gotten the call to do the audition, so I did a little bit of homework ahead of time. Some of his older, from his older, like, Riverside records. And then I knew some of the hit tunes really well, because long before I was a band member, I was a huge fan, and I was a kid at the concert, and I was asking my parents to buy T-shirts from Papa Mangione at the Cape Cod Melody Tent or the South Shore Music Circus in the New England area, and it was an amazing time. I still remember. Back then I was still, fresh off of, the whole school music kind of scene where you're used to getting like maybe a book of charts for your ensemble at the Eastman School. And this was just sort of a command from Chuck, says, you'll go to my sister Josephine's house and she's going to give you every record I made. I would suggest by starting learning all of the title tracks from every record. And I suggest starting today, because the first gig is whenever. I'm like, okay, yeah. That's what I did. Some of them I had to play on a turntable. Some I had cassettes, and then some were some CDs, and the work began. So it was amazing. It was an incredible learning experience. It was also a walk down memory lane, because the music was so near and dear to my heart as a student musician.
Well, and it really shows the way that jazz education is part like school learning and his part on the job learning, and it's really changed. We can actually see it through how Chuck Mangione talked about coming to the Eastman School of Music and there not really being any jazz classes when he was a student. Though I love what he said later. He said he wished he'd been a little bit more open-minded because at 18 he said, I was going to be a bebop player in a jazz club. I would have committed anybody to an insane asylum who walked up to me and said, pretty soon you're going to have the chance to conduct the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra.
Yeah.
Which, of course, he famously did a number of times, and I love his symphonic music. But then, and I want to share a little clip from RPO Principal Pops conductor Jeff Tyzik, who came here to Rochester to study with Chuck Mangione when he was teaching at the Eastman School, and he was a bit of a tough teacher.
He was pretty tough as a director of a jazz band. I mean, it was very hard on me, actually, but I think it was all in the pursuit of trying to make me be a better player and other musicians as well. And at that time, the jazz program was really small at the Eastman School of Music, and it was kind of looked down upon. It wasn't looked as, a serious part of the school. But he really transformed that because, some of the ensembles, when they were in the theater doing concerts, they were attracting 500 or 600 people. Chuck Mangione, when we did a jazz concert in the Eastman Theater with students, we were getting 3,000 people at the concert. So people, they came for the music, but they came for him. And then he ended up bringing Rayburn Wright to the school. And he is the one who really was the inspiration for creating the jazz and contemporary media department that so many guys came out of and are still, in the business today, making a living as a result of that. So he was really a catalyst for the growth of jazz and popular music at that school.
And Bob, you're now teaching students there who are learning that profession in a place where it didn't used to be the norm.
That's absolutely true. I know when I was a student at the University of Rochester, but taking a lot of classes at Eastman, everything that was happening there was sort of the fruits of Chuck's labor. And I feel in so many ways that the trajectory of my career is so intertwined with my connection to Chuck, and so much of what he's touched at Eastman and what he's touched in the music world has just really just turned into gold. And on a personal note, I'm incredibly appreciative for that.
And Ardis, you of course have a very different perspective, not as a music student or someone sharing the bandstand at a gig, but you were still very involved in the music as a kid.
Yeah. So our family is very close, and it's not, it was not at all uncommon to say, okay, all 6 of the Mangione grandchildren are coming on the road with the band. And that meant every airplane, every bus ride, every gig. And they did not get babysitters for us. I sat on the stage at Red Rocks, sat on the stage at these gigs, and the main reason was he would say, you have to feel this from the inside. So while there is this orchestra and this incredible music happening on the stage, there's also these kids just randomly planted. I'm sitting next to my dad's piano. My brother was next to Steve Gadd's drums, and we just got to be there and experience that completely. But it wasn't, my dad would be with him on certain gigs, and then my father would separate and go off and play one of his gigs, and we would go with him for a week or whatever it was and then reconnect. So our summers were never at summer camp. They were on the road.
And that's so many of the stories I got when I would talk to people would be about family and the connection to music, that essentially, I guess, your grandparents, their parents,
Yep.
Multiple people independently when I talked to them mentioned Mama Mangione's pasta and dinner for the musicians and Duke Ellington and Ron Carter at the dinner table. And then it carried on through the generation.
Dizzy Gillespie at the dinner table. That was our frequent flyer. Sarah Vaughan had come over. There's a story about Sarah Vaughan sitting in the garage eating, sitting on a tipped on its side wooden pop crate, right? In Rochester, we call it pop. And the crate was her seat. Dizzy Gillespie would pop in, and then there's a classic photo of Dizzy. My grandmother made him a birthday cake because it happened to be his birthday, and of course he, with his cheeks, blew out the candle. Right. So we just the idea was You're hungry, you need to eat, you come to our house. You want to feel loved, you come to the house. You be a part of it, you come to the house. But it was also reciprocal. For my Uncle Chuck, one Christmas, it was like, okay, kids, your Christmas present is you're invited to the Grammys, right? It wasn't, it's all about me kind of vibe. It was always us. Of course he wins the Grammy for the song he writes for my grandmother, for the Bellavia family, for the beautiful way is what Bellavia means. So it really was. And my grandfather set up a grill at the A&M studio lot in Los Angeles where everybody's fancy. And he was like, no, I'm going to make some sausage. And he went to town cooking for people who happened to be coming in and out ready to make a record. And but he was doing what he did, she did what she did, and when you walked into that house, you knew you were welcome. You knew whatever it was that you were all about was fine, and it didn't matter.
And that's really beautiful because I think, the artist's life, the musician's life can be tough. You're on the road. You're really trying hard to practice your craft. You're probably dealing with like dodgy club owners and everything else to have some sort of beautiful space. And I think a lot of that spirit comes through in the music too. And I want to hear from Bob what it's like getting into that world. But first, I am going to take one of our calls. We have my colleague, John Andrus from WXXI Classical 91.5, who's been in town for many years and has some memories to share.
Well, hello, Mona, and congratulations. A wonderful program so far. I have 3 quick stories. First of all, I remember a place called Hiley Morris's Alley on the corner of Ridge Road West and Dewey Avenue, where Bat McGrath and Don Potter were singers, and they were good friends of Chuck Mangione. And a story told, Chuck Mangione would be there at 4 a.m. in the morning doing his music, along with Bat McGrath and D. Harvey Potter. Well, they all assembled for a Friends in Love concert, and our own station, WXXI TV, carried that live from the Eastman Theater, where he conducted the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, as I heard you mention earlier, Mona. And one final note, I remember Rochester broadcaster and radio owner Jack Salvino ended his long stay on BBF 950 radio in 1978 with Feels So Good. And he opened his brand new morning show on WBOR FM 2 days later with the same piece. And I thought that was pretty special. And I want to thank you for assembling many of the Chuck Mangione and Company CDs for us to use, not only on Classical 91.5, but on the Route and other venues as well. So this is quite a Rochester legend. Gap Mangione still alive and doing well and playing excellent jazz. So what do you think about that?
Well, thank you so much, John. And I want to invite anyone else who has a memory or a story, because it seems there's so many throughout our community, whether it is as a listener, that moment that you first heard his music, or at a club or at a gig or on the bandstand. The number to call is 1-844-295-TALK. That's 295-8255. You can email connections@wxxi.org, and they'll share your messages with us. And if you are popping over to the WXXI News YouTube channel, there's also a place to comment there as well. So, Bob, what was it like stepping into this sort of musical family and world after you listened through all those records as fast as you could?
Oh, it was amazing. I actually here, reminiscing about the pasta dinners at Ardis's grandparents' house. That was pretty awesome. Yeah, that is a very fond memory. But musically, it's like, once I sort of felt like I was catching my groove and really developing my sound on the gig. I remember, some seminal moments, like when Chuck would say things to me that at the time I didn't realize how important it was. I remember there was one night, it was in Buffalo, of all places. It was just before we were about to sort of hit the road playing bigger venues and stuff. And he said to me, he's like, I noticed that you're trying to play things at times maybe a little bit too close to the record. And he said, I hired you to play like you. I didn't hire you to sound like the record. He said, I guarantee if you play like yourself, you're going to play better, and you won't be so uptight. And then there might have been a couple of other adjectives in there, but we're, we have FCC things to worry about. So, but it was a really important message, and it's, at the end of the day, it's like what you do as a jazz artist. It only means a lot if it's honest, and that's something that, the study of jazz involves a lot of transcribing, learning things by ear, and developing your oral skills. But at the same time, you have to be careful that what you're doing leaves room for your own creativity. And I think from that moment forward, I had a comfort and an ease to be more like myself, and that was really, really amazing. And I felt like as I evolved on the gig, it became more and more and more fun. And sometimes he would turn to me, and I would always play this classical guitar thing out in front of the Children of Sanchez suite, and sometimes he would, you can't see it, but on the radio, but he would he would stretch his hands out and say, "You can go for a while." And the first time he did that, it was a little bit scary, and I'm thinking, I hope I have enough to say. and then after a while, I think I developed enough things to say, and then sometimes he would push his hands a little closer together if time was going by a little too quickly at the concert. But
that's a feeling we know well on the radio. With time.
Yes. So yeah, he was the conductor, the producer, and the star. So.
Well, and that's him finding his musical voice. To read the early memories where he really thought he was going to be a hard bop player. He played with Art Blakey, he played with Dizzy, and he sort of had a certain vision for what a jazz musician was in a club in New York City. But his career went so many different directions. I have a recording of a mass movement, a Gloria, Children of Sanchez. And so I guess if you have some thoughts on how he found that musical voice over time, or did that sort of play out as you knew him personally?
I think that the idea that the music, people always know, Chuck Mangione feels so good. The reality of the situation is, if you go back to the early stuff, it just still warms you, right? There, The Hill Where the Lord Hides. People will stop me and say, that song changed my life. I got my first job, and my boss said, that Friends in Love concert changed everything in my world. And so to go back and to look at some of that maybe not so popular music and then watch how it evolves. But it was so complicated, so complex, so many layers to it. And then you hear the Children of Sanchez decade or so later, and it still carries that weight of the origins with the orchestra back in Rochester. I mean, you have to remember, he went to every major city in the United States, right? And he decided to come back to Rochester. Always. This was always home. So there is that family root here, but there's also a musical set of roots here. The original players that he began with when he was a kid and strolled up and down Jazz Street is that we have black and white photos from that time, and he's still friendly and spends his time with them, right? So to the very end. So I think today, to stop and reflect on the music, it's to understand the whole library of music. I walked down the aisle to a song that he wrote. I walked back down the aisle to Love the Feelin'. And then our wedding dance was to Bella Via, right? So when I say he wrote the soundtrack for our whole family, I feel that in my absolute core, and we all do, the idea that I can explain it, no way. He really felt as though this all just came to him, and if that's the case, that is the coolest gift, right? To be able to just see that in so many layers and to be able to make it. And he was you were saying as a conductor, like such an intense conductor. So when it was time for those horns to come in, he would say, hit me in the face, right? He wanted them to do their job, and it was intense, but man, so that's why I'm saying sitting on that stage, you could see that all transpire. his back's to the audience, but they felt it, and he knew what they needed, and it was phenomenal, right? That the original Gloria, where the choir is sitting unbeknownst to everybody in the audience, and then when it's time for them to do their thing, they stand, and the whole entire Eastman Theater takes a collective. And bam, that's how the music comes to him. And he didn't need him on stage the whole time. He just needed him for that one tune. And wow. So there was a little element of fun and surprise. But there was always that deep seriousness about the music and what it needed to mean in order for it to have a value.
And before we get to our next caller, Debbie, I want to say that reminds me of something Jeff Tyzik said about both being inspired to come here to Rochester to study with Chuck, but also he compared him to Leonard Bernstein, to George Gershwin, these multifaceted sort of inspired artists.
Well, when I came to the Eastman School in 1969, one of the reasons I came to Rochester was somebody sent me a Chuck Mangione recording. And when I listened to that, I was inspired by his music enough to want to come to Rochester and study at the Eastman School where he was teaching. He was the director of the jazz band when I was a freshman in 1969. I played lead trumpet in that group. So I worked with him in that context. And then in 1970, I went to see the Friends in Love concert, the groundbreaking concert he did with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. And it was a life-changing event for me to watch somebody who was so creative with a symphony orchestra. The thing that was great about his music is he used pop elements, jazz elements, Latin elements, folk music elements, and classical elements all together to create a very unique sound, which was kind of the inspiration for my whole career as well. And after that, I started working with him professionally in 1975 until about 1982, right when he had the success of the Feel So Good and then the Children of Sanchez and these other great concerts. It was just amazing to tour with him and play places like the Hollywood Bowl and have 18,000 people be there to see him and his music. So he was incredible inspiration to me.
So yeah, that sense of the different styles. And of course, if you've experienced over the past, 3 decades now, any of the amazing Jeff Tyzik RPO Pops concerts and his conducting, that again is another thing inspired by that connection. We do have on the line Debbie from Henrietta, who has memories as a freelance writer who got to interview Chuck Mangione, and I would love to hear some of those. Hello, Debbie.
Hello. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you here, be part of this memory and sharing in the conversation.
Thank you so much. I was driving doing some errands and heard that you guys are talking about Chuck Mangione. I'm like, oh, God, I got to call. I have to call. So I have 2 thoughts. One is, yes, I'm a local freelance writer. My full name is Debbie Roxanne Waltzer. And I had the privilege of interviewing Chuck by phone probably a good 15, 18 years ago for a piece for, I think it was the Democrat and Chronicle. It might have been Rochester Magazine. I can't remember exactly which because I did a lot of pieces. But I called Chuck, and he said, I got to call you right back. I said, no problem. I'm putting in a chicken into the oven. And he says to me, that's okay. I'm doing a sound check at Hilton Head. So, I mean, it was comfortable. It was just, just what you would think from Chuck Mangione. Anyone that can produce that kind of beautiful music, what a beautiful personality he had. So it was just a very comfortable conversation about his music. But previous to that experience, when I was a teenager, I attended one of his concerts and heard a song that has stuck with me since I was 16 years old that he wrote called Look to the Children. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with that piece or not. But it was sung by Esther Satterfield and I believe Don Potter together. It was one of those concerts. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the most incredible pieces I have ever heard. I think most people would agree. It is gorgeous. The lyrics are beautiful about children and how this world is really meant for them and we need to do everything for them. But I don't hear that song anymore. I personally play it on the piano. I play a lot of Chuck Mangione on the piano. But I would love if we could resurrect that piece, Look to the Children. So there are my thoughts. Chuck Mangione was a blessing. It is so sad that he's gone, but he's not gone, and he'll never be gone. I believe that Chuck Mangione is Rochester, and Rochester is Chuck Mangione. Thank you.
Debbie, thank you so much. And both my guests here, Ardis Mangione-Lindley and Bob Snyder, are nodding along about that song.
Yeah.
So both of you have some thoughts?
Well-
Yeah, that's I think it's an amazing piece of music. It's like it might be like the coolest pop tune ever written. Seriously. And I think it was probably 2 or 3 months before Chuck passed away. I had reached out and I said, "Hey, I want to do a concert of your music in my next faculty recital." I tend to do things with I play a lot, with guitar, piano, duet with my buddy Paul Hoffman, and that's the first song that we're playing in Hatch Hall.
Yay.
Yep.
Oh. And do we know when that concert's coming up?
February.
February,
At
okay.
Hatch Hall. Yeah.
Beautiful space to hear
Perfect.
music.
Yeah. Yep.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Rochester, the Look to the Children, you have to understand the history there, right? So you have, first of all, my Uncle Chuck, my Aunt Josephine, Aunt Jo, and my dad, Gab, are 3 outrageously close siblings. I mean, still to this day, right? He and my dad walked every day. Got their little exercise at 10:30 every day. They'd get out there and they'd go for their little power walk. And my aunt is the glue that holds that whole trio together. There is no doubt that if you met one of them, you've automatically met the other 2. They travel in that pack. They're 6 kids. So my cousins Nancy and Diana, Chuck's daughters, my cousins Cheryl and Freddy, my Aunt Jo's children, and my brother and I, Gap's kids. This family when everything happened and we got the news, the family was together within a half an hour. The whole family. That's how this works. So they would watch us, and we were growing, and we were the kids in this Look to the Children era that they were looking out for. They said, every generation wants their kids to have it a little bit better, but in this case, that song is really just to make sure that you're understanding they're so simple and so good to each other, and kids in general will be friends and they will do kind things. It's the learned negativity that he was warning, I think, all of us a little bit about in that song. But that's the thing. And yes, I think my father is he's playing a gig on Sunday in Rome, New York at the Rome Jazz Festival.
Cool.
And I think it's gonna be, first of all, it'll be amazing and magical because it's with the big band. But I think it will also be a little, let's not, I don't even know what the right word to say. It's definitely going to be a different experience playing that music, that Mangione music, in light of these past, 2 weeks.
Thank you for sharing, especially at this time where, we're all sharing a loss of, in a way, a musical icon, a colleague, a friend, a neighbor, but this is family for you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And this is Ardis Mangione-Lindley. She is daughter of Gap Mangione and niece to Chuck Mangione, who we're paying tribute to this hour here on Connections. We're also joined by Bob Snyder, who's Associate Professor of Jazz Studies at the Eastman School of Music, but also a friend and an alum of the Chuck Mangione Band. And I've really appreciated the calls. We'll have more after we take our one break for the hour here on WXXI's Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
You're listening to Connections on WXXI News. I'm Mona Seghatoleslami. Here as part of Arts Friday, we're celebrating the music and legacy of Chuck Mangione. We're inviting you to join in the conversation. We've already heard some great memories and stories, favorite songs that are perhaps sometimes underappreciated or not the number 1 or 2 first mentioned hits. So you can add your voice to the conversation by calling 1-844-295-TALK. That's 844-295-8255. You can also share your story through the email connections@wxxi.org and catch us on the WXXI News YouTube channel. And like, comment, and subscribe, as they say. I am joined here by Chuck Mangione's niece, Ardis Mangione-Lindley, who has wonderful memories of touring with the band and being part of some of these famed concerts like at Red Rocks and Experience Music. And Bob Snyder, guitarist, associate professor of jazz studies at Eastman School of Music and an alum of the Chuck Mangione Band. Possibly a bit controversial, Bob, but what was it like for you, a dedicated, dyed-in-the-wool Red Sox fan, playing with such a great Yankees fan?
This is no joke. The day of my audition, Chuck had to excuse himself and said, "Sorry, I have to take a call from George Steinbrenner." and then it was like one of those like Harry Potter moments where it's like Harry feels like Voldemort is like entering his head, but I was just trying to be cool, like, don't tell him you're a Red Sox fan, don't do it. And then and then he said something like, yeah, it's about this upcoming thing. I'm gonna play the anthem at the stadium this coming May, but it's a little ways away. And then it was later. There was someone else that was there taking an audition who was playing drums, and he got sent out a little bit early. He asked me to stick around, and that's when he asked me to be in the band. And then he asked me a little bit about myself, but I still didn't tell him I was a Red Sox fan yet. But then that George Steinbrenner call about playing the anthem sort of became a thing, because it coincided with my first time playing at the famed Blue Note Jazz Club in New York with Chuck, and then it was a few days before we were headed to the Blue Note. And he said, "What are you doing on this afternoon during that week?" I think it was either the Saturday or the Sunday, and I said I'll probably just be chilling, I won't be doing much, getting my rest. And then he said, "Why don't you come to the Yankee Stadium with me?" And at that point, he knew I was a Red Sox fan, and they were playing the Red Sox. And so he takes me out onto the field with him while he's doing his sound check, and all the Yankees are gathering around. Willie Randolph at that point is an assistant coach, and then is Don Mattingly's towards the end of his career. And as Chuck is playing a couple of notes on his flugelhorn into the microphone, Don Mattingly comes up behind him and like taps him in the butt with a baseball bat, and he turns around and he sees it's Mattingly. It was hysterical. And then the game started out okay. We were actually sitting in George Steinbrenner's luxury box upstairs, but George wasn't there. And then one of the sluggers for the Red Sox hit a huge home run, and I got up and I cheered. And he said to me, "The next time you get up, you won't be taking the stairs down to the next level." He was joking, of course. And then the Yankees, they crushed him that day. But
there was a deep relationship with those Yankees. And,
yeah.
They would come to the concerts, and he would go to the games.
Well,
they would come over.
later that night, Bernie and Gerald Williams came to the Blue Note, and I didn't know that they were there. And there's a knock on the dressing room door, and I open it, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" and then Bernie says to me, he's like, "I really like your playing. Could I get some guitar lessons?" And I said, "Does it matter if I'm a Red Sox fan?" And then Chuck came out of his dressing room. He's like, "Who are you talking to?" So it was hysterical. Yeah.
Oh, we have another call. This is Bill in Fairport, who has memories of his first live jazz concert that changed his life with Chuck Mangione. By any chance, is this Bill Tiberio, if you're calling from Fairport?
No, not Bill Tiberio, different Bill. But our son was in the jazz orchestra with Bill Tiberio, so he was a great jazz guy. Well, I just want to say I was in high school when Chuck Mangione's first concert album came out, of Friends in Love. And he was going around to orchestras, and he went to the Utica Symphony Orchestra and played with them. And every high school within the county brought all their music students down to the concert so we could experience live jazz. It was the first time any of us had ever been to a live jazz concert, coming from up in the Adirondacks area. And it was fantastic. And it started a lifelong love of jazz on my part, and listening to his music and others. And as I recall, jazz is good stuff, because my wife was going to grad school in D.C., and she called me one day and said, "Hey, my friend has 2 tickets to hear some jazz guy." I said, "Well, what's his name?" She said, "Oh, it's something like Dizzy Gillespie." And I said, "Do you perhaps mean Dizzy Gillespie?" She says, "Yeah. I said, "Take the tickets. We're going." So, we love the Rochester Jazz Festival. We've loved Chuck Mangione. Both of us grew up with it. It's such a sad thing to have him gone, but his music will live on. And he's had such an effect on so many people and so many kids at the time who had never heard anything like his music before, playing with an orchestra. He was just fabulous. Just fabulous.
Oh, Bill, thank you so much for sharing that story. And Dizzy Gillespie is something that's going to stay with me there.
Dizzy Gillespie, that's my favorite. I got my wife a big T-shirt with Dizzy Gillespie on the front of it,
So we are discussing all things Chuck Mangione, remembering the music, personal memories, sharing stories. The number to call to be part of this Connections discussion here is 1-844-295-TALK, or you can email connections@wxxi.org. But something that Bill said reminded me of something that we talked about on the phone, Ardis, that was an interesting moment for a lot of people who are listening to the Beatles and She Loves You, and that kind of changed a lot of people's world. But then what was often purely instrumental music was sort of another shift for listeners, for music fans.
I think so. When you listen to instrumental music, you get to decide how it makes you feel. And songs with lyrics are mostly what we listen to on the radio, and it's been that way since there's been a radio. But the idea that he could put emotion into songs and let you decide how it made you feel, and that we talked about, Bob and I, before this show started today, talked about how it made the people in Poland feel about their solidarity movement. Children of Sanchez became their anthem. And Bob was at that concert, performing at that concert. I'm going to let Bob tell that story.
Yeah. I had no idea that the main theme from Children of Sanchez was like the theme song of the solidarity movement in Poland, and especially with all the things going on in the world today and that part of the world. It was very, very, very powerful. And it's so ironic that that must have been I think it's 1995. There's like some recent YouTubes from that have been posted. And it was, the music was so powerful. There were more people in that theater than there should have been. Probably in Monroe County, the fire marshal would have shut down any venue that was overpacked. There were people standing and sitting in the aisles, and at the end of the Children of Sanchez suite, the crowd just literally erupted. It was so powerful. I had no idea until afterwards that it was such a big deal for them. And that was like maybe just a little more than 10 years after Poland was able to extricate from the Iron Curtain. And of all places we were playing in was the old communist meeting hall that in that decade's time had been turned into a beautiful theater with amazing acoustics. And then the other part of the facility turned into a casino. But they had, I walked around the theater, they had all of the old communist meeting hall, translation, if you needed a certain language, you could plug your headset into this or to that. It was pretty wild. Wow. Yeah.
And so that's kind of amazing because that's music by an American musician, a Rochesterian, for a movie about a story from Mexico.
Exactly.
I only recently realized that's from a movie. I kind of want to see if we can screen it at the Little, the movie called The Children of Sanchez. Yeah. And then resonating with the democracy movement in Poland really speaks to something about the music or about our shared humanity.
I think there's definitely the lyric is very powerful, but there's just something about that, the melody. It's so beautiful, and I think people really embraced it, especially over there. Yeah,
Right.
it was amazing. It was a moment I'll never forget as long as I live.
Right. The lyric, all men need a place to live with dignity, was, I think, something that absolutely meant, it still does. It means, but he watched the drafts of the Children of Sanchez film, where Anthony Quinn is literally wobbling on a horse. And they were like, we're going to redo that part, don't worry, but this is where we need this song, and this is where we need that song, and can you do this? And he checked into a hotel and spent Labor Day weekend writing this symphony, this magnificent piece of music, and it became the soundtrack of the film. The film did not impress anybody to any great deal, but the soundtrack did, and that's I think when people say, I really felt something, it very often is. The next sentence is Children of Sanchez.
That is, we have, I think, music. There's a few stories like that. There's a Bizet Suite L'Arlésienne, and apparently that play, total junk. No one's really into it, but the music is some of people's most favorites.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and that's, we have a comment from off air. Rob in Rochester was wondering sort of about musical influences. Was Chuck influenced by any of his contemporaries like Steely Dan or... And I also have heard from someone else who said that that was the beginning, again, that instrumental music that they sort of their relative turned to listening to Chicago and more jazz-influenced pop bands at the time. So,
yeah, I don't know if Chuck was as influenced by some of the contemporary pop groups. If anything, I think it would be maybe some of the side musicians, the supporting cast that might have been checking out some of the different sounds, whether it was like some groovy effects or a particular kind of drum groove or something. That I think Chuck's music is in its own category, but maybe some of those influences sort of crept in from some of the side players.
Yeah.
And
I think the Mangione music was his vibe. It was what he felt, what he heard, and I think the early influences, right? Like he called Dizzy Gillespie his musical father. Dizzy Gillespie had that updo trumpet, and he gave one of them to Chuck, and that was prized possession. It meant so much to him. When there was the earthquake in Italy in the 1980, and he brought in his musical friends, his absolute influences. He brought Dizzy Gillespie in. He brought Chick Corea in. Steve Gadd came in to play drums, and they all waited their turn. And it was an all-nighter. We were up all night in this Rochester hotel raising $100,000 for Italian earthquake victims. But on the stage was, his all-star, his favorites, his influences. So I think it was more of those people influencing the early days and then letting him do what he wanted to do with it.
And speaking of 1980, before we take another call, that's the year of the Miracle on Ice, right? And Chuck wrote a song for that Olympics. I only learned that recently, but several people have talked to me about that.
Oh, yeah.
What is that one called again? That is
Give It All You Got.
Give It All You Got.
Yeah, he also composed the fanfare for the Olympics. So for the entire Olympic broadcast, that's his, that's also Chuck's. So it's amazing. Yeah, that's and Give It All You Got is on the Fun and Games record.
Right. Well, we went to the Lake Placid Museum there to celebrate the Olympic Museum, and he's on the wall, and my kids were like, "Wait, there's Uncle Chuck." Yeah, right. This was a big deal. He played live, and my husband asked him, "What was the most difficult gig you've ever played?" And he said, that one. Why? Well, first of all, you're playing live in front of the planet, right? Billions of people with a B. But also your feet are on ice and you got to play the horn. And he said it was so stinking cold. Oh. And then it was like, wait, you got to wait a minute. No, you got to wait 5 more minutes. And now he's frigid. And he's shaking and he's nervous. But he pulled it together, breathed deep, play that horn for the world. So I think, I'm glad that Steve asked him that question, but it was not the answer I had expected. It was
Well,
the
and
ice.
it's hard for it to be cold for any musician, but horn players
Right,
especially. Ooh,
exactly.
you're holding a metal instrument.
Right.
Which,
Yeah.
before we take our one more call, I want to mention something. Just a lot of people have asked me, I think, if they're not as familiar with musical instruments, about the flugelhorn, which I think he did end up finding or found him at the Eastman School of Music. It's sort of a wider spaced instrument, a lower, a slightly mellower relative of the trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
He called it the pregnant trumpet.
Yeah.
And he went everywhere with it. And he would say, you got to keep this. It's like, he said, my horn is like a woman. You've got to keep her close. You got to hug her. You got to take care of it. You've got to make sure that you are doing everything all day along with this person. And then at night, then, here you are at this concert, and now this living thing that he toted with him all day. He really felt a very strong connection to that horn.
And
He would take it everywhere. So there were times I was with him late at night, getting late night food after a gig. Even one time at Nick Tahoe's, that was insane. Yeah,
He's got the horn.
Well,
he played too.
Oh, at like
Yes.
out at that's cool.
Yes, yeah, it was amazing.
But I mean, it wasn't like there were no snooty little airs about him. Like, he came and played at my elementary class. And the kid, my friends who are now, we're grown-ups, Ardis, do you remember when he came to our 5th grade class? There was no, oh no, I'm too cool for that. He would come to Mendon High School and cheer for my son's basketball games all 4 years, And there was no, I guess you could, a lot of people could take that and it would go right to their head, but he still just stayed a family guy, regular guy who would carry his horn around and play for Nick Tahoe's.
Yeah, it's inspiring. I like musically inspiring, but his connection to the community and the way he inspired generations of kids like myself to learn music, to study music, to try to get great at it. That's a legacy that very, very few other artists can say that I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of memories, I think we have time for one more from Pat in Irondequoit, who has memories of the Freddy's Walking concert.
Hi, yes. I used to be a day camp counselor for United Cerebral Palsy, and one of my camp kids was Freddy many, many years ago. And I was just wondering if you could give me, some of the background about Freddy's Walk-In concert and some of your musical thoughts as well. I thought Esther Satterfield was just stunning.
And she and Don Potter can bring everybody to tears. That remains one of my personal favorite songs ever. So my cousin Freddy was, he was a big baby and he wasn't walking. And, he had these big blue eyes and this huge smile and just couldn't get walking.
Gorgeous kid.
Right. They finally said this is where he needs to go. He gets all the help he needs here in Rochester. Thank you so much, everybody in Rochester who pitched in and helped him. And he began walking. And so, yes, he decided to write this song in tribute to the success that Freddy had. Now, I will tell you, Freddy is a real he's my absolute, he's adorable, and he does everything. He's got Freddy has an adult successful life, and this is not like some sad song and it was it. Freddy has real jobs, real lives, real girlfriends, real everything, and he's a real person. This was not an imaginary tune like Land of Make Believe. He was writing this song about someone who meant so much to him, and he knew the potential, and he wasn't going to let this get in the way, and so it didn't. And now, it absolutely has not held him back at all with that inspiration.
Well, thank you so much, Pat, for bringing that up. In our last couple minutes, I feel like we could keep sharing wonderful stories of music. Perhaps each of you could choose one song or perhaps, an old bootleg on YouTube or something we should be finding. What's another thing? Like, we've heard a few songs that are perhaps not the number one most famous that we should be digging into that's really great to explore. So do you have any favorites to recommend, whether it's a performance or a song?
Oh my gosh. How long do we have?
I know, it's so hard.
Can we take the second hour?
I was about to say, I just noticed we also have an
Yeah.
email from Paul. He says, remembers hearing that Gap and Chuck saved a baby's life?
Oh, yeah, that's a huge story.
Okay.
The essence of it is they're in the grocery store, and this young mom comes running down. My baby's drowning in the bathtub. So, you know, my dad does his 50-yard dash like Franklin High School track team up the stairs. Chuck's right behind him. They go upstairs. They fish the baby out of the bathtub. My father is not, he's like, he pushes and pushes and pushes on this baby's chest, and he's trying to do everything that he can. And all of a sudden, the baby takes a breath. And the fire department arrives, and my dad and my Uncle Chuck walk back down the stairs quietly from this woman's apartment, and the street is full of people who are silent. Fast forward 40 years, my dad's at the lodge at Wycliffe playing, and a man walks in, and he says, "I'm the baby."
Oh my gosh, maybe you get off the hook for the favorite songs then, or we'll have to follow up and make a little listening playlist of suggestions. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I want to thank so much Ardis Mangione-Lindley, daughter of Gat Mangione, niece of Chuck Mangione, for sharing family perspective and memories of sharing the music. Bob Snyder, who teaches guitar and jazz at the Eastman School of Music and is an alum of the Chuck Mangione Band, for sharing his musical memories and personal stories as well. And to our whole production team, Rob Braden, Julie Williams, Chris Nessel and Golding, Katie Epner, our volunteer, Mary Hussein Callan, and everyone who makes this show work together, and to Miles as well, making this all work for radio, streaming, podcast, and on YouTube. Thank you for listening to Connections from WXXI News.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.